Hi guys. Tonight we ease into the drifting hush of a world without central heating, without space heaters, without even the familiar glow of a fireplace. You stand at the edge of a frozen frontier, snow already swirling around your boots, and the first breath you take feels sharp enough to cut. The wind pushes at your coat as if testing whether you are actually ready to follow the early American settlers who walked straight into storms that seemed designed to peel the warmth off their bones. You picture yourself stepping out of your modern comfort and into their raw winter. One simple truth hits you right away. You probably will not survive this if you try it with only the comforts you know now. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, let me know your location and your local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Let the cold settle around the edges of your imagination and follow your breath as it moves deeper into the story. You take your first steps into the scene, feeling the crunch of snow underfoot. It is not gentle snowfall. It is the kind that slants sideways and rattles against your face like thrown sand. You draw your collar up, the fabric stiffening in the cold. Now the storm is not just around you, it is testing you. You can almost sense why settlers would call nights like this a battle, even though they carried no weapons. The cold itself acted like an enemy that never slept. You move forward across the frontier path. Trees bend under the pressure of ice. Your fingers begin to throb, and you instinctively tuck them deeper into your gloves. Ahead, you imagine a small settlement, barely more than a cluster of rough cabins. None of them look ready for a storm like this. In fact, you sense that no one who arrived here in the early years of settlement was truly prepared for the winters that came sweeping out of the continent's interior. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind as you walk. Early American frontier winters could drop far below freezing for long stretches, often without warning. Settlers recorded nights where temperatures plunged so dramatically that water jugs froze solid indoors. You understand that you are entering an environment where the cold has its own authority, shaping the blueprint of survival before anyone has time to argue. A gust blasts across your path, making you squint. You smell the metallic bite of the cold, the way it dries your nose and stings the back of your throat. Under the snowdrifts, you hear the woven hush of branches rubbing together. A little to your left, you spot the shape of a crude cabin. Its door is barely hanging on its hinges. You imagine settlers ducking inside, shaking off snow, already bracing for a long night without a proper fire. Before you step closer, a small detail surfaces in your memory, a quirky tidbit tucked away in old letters and journals. Some settlers swore that rubbing a thin layer of goose grease on the cheeks kept frostbite away during severe storms. You try to picture the shine of it on your own face, and you cannot help but smile at the odd practicality of the idea. History is full of solutions that sound strange until the moment you are cold enough to try them. The storm thickens around you. Your boots sink deeper into drifts. You reach the cabin and run your gloved hand along the rough logs. The cold has already begun to warp the wood. A crack runs through one corner, wide enough to let a hunting knife slip through. You wonder how settlers slept inside this structure while the night growled outside. Historians still argue whether the earliest frontier communities underestimated winter or simply had no way to understand the scale of it until the first blizzard pinned them down. You weigh that thought for a moment, leaning your head against the cold log wall. Was it naivety or pure necessity that pushed them forward into landscapes that swallowed heat so efficiently? You take a slow breath and let it fog the air as you push the door open. The hinges complain. The interior is dim, lit only by the faint grey glow squeezing in through gaps between the logs. The floor is dirt, frozen hard like stone. You immediately feel the cold pooling around your ankles. You step inside and close the door behind you. A thin line of snow still spills through a crack near the threshold, whispering along the floor like a living thing. Your shoulders relax only slightly as you explore the tiny room. There is no fireplace here, not even a fire pit. Just a shallow hole in the ground where someone tried to start a small flame earlier, now nothing more than ash and a few stubborn flecks of charcoal. You kneel beside it, touch the edge, and feel how utterly cold it is. The last warmth vanished long ago. Imagine sleeping here, you tell yourself. You try to picture curling up on the floor, wrapped in whatever layers you brought with you, listening to the wind strike the walls like invisible waves. You picture the settlers who had to do this for weeks, sometimes months, before they could gather enough materials or time to build a proper hearth. You breathe out slowly, letting the cold story settle deeper into your imagination. A window opening barely larger than your hand sits in the far wall. You walk to it, tracing a circle in the frost layered on the inside. When you peer out, the world is white and shuddering, the storm tightening every loose object into a frantic dance. You imagine the footsteps of settlers vanishing behind them as soon as they make them. You imagine a mother holding her children in the dark, shushing their fear with soft words that freeze on her tongue. You shift your weight and run your fingers along the edge of the wall. You feel the wind pushing through tiny cracks, each one a small reminder that the cabin is fighting a losing battle against the cold. Your mind drifts to the simple truth that early pioneers had to work constantly, not just to build, but to keep what they built from falling apart in weather like this. You close your eyes and listen. The wind hums at the seams of the cabin, deep and low. Snow hisses against the logs. And beneath it all, you sense the same quiet determination that settlers must have felt, the need to keep going despite the cold pressing in on every side. You breathe slower now, letting your shoulders ease down, letting the storm become a distant shape beyond the cabin walls. You feel your pulse settle. The cold is still around you, but the fear it stirred at the beginning of the scene softens into understanding. Before the next part of your journey begins, you linger in this fragile shelter, knowing that the storm outside is only the first of many. You stay in the dim shell of the cabin for a moment longer, letting the air settle around you. The storm outside still scrapes at the walls, and you feel the structure tremble just slightly, as if the wind itself is testing the joints. When you finally ease the door open again, a thin sheet of snow slides in at your feet. You step back into the blizzard, pulling the collar of your coat higher, and you sense that the settlers who built these first cabins probably had no time to admire their own work. They built while shivering, while worrying, while rushing to beat storms that did not care about schedules. You trudge through the deepening snow toward another cabin farther up the slope. This one is little more than a frame. The walls rise only to your waist, the logs stacked loosely, some still unnotched. The roof is half finished, a patchwork of bark, branches, and rough shingles that look ready to lift away with a strong gust. You tilt your head and watch a few pieces of bark flutter at the edge, as if waving for help. You step inside through a doorway that has no door at all. The interior is exposed to the wind, and the snow blows straight across the room in a diagonal sheet. You can see how the settlers tried to make progress before the storm caught them. A few chisels rest on a stump. A hatchet lies where someone dropped it, the blade half buried in frost. Whoever worked here must have left in a hurry, maybe with that first groan of thunder announcing the storm's arrival. You imagine yourself in their place. You picture the sky turning grey too quickly, the temperature dropping with no warning. You picture the sudden urgency in your chest as you realize the cabin will not be finished in time. You imagine grabbing your tools, shaking the snow from your sleeves, and sprinting back to a more solid shelter. Maybe you carry a child under one arm. Maybe you carry the last bundle of blankets you managed to bring from the wagon. Either way, you know that this half-built home will not keep you warm tonight. A mainstream historical fact emerges as you stand in that skeletal room. Early American settlers often arrived at their chosen land late in the season because travel itself consumed precious months. Rivers overflowed, wagons broke, and roads dissolved into mud. By the time families reached the frontier, autumn had already begun pressing hard against them. Many simply did not have enough time to construct the fully enclosed homes they planned. You feel that truth in the icy air brushing your cheeks. Winter did not care that the walls were unfinished. You crouch and trail your fingers along the half-frozen dirt floor. Your fingertips sting, and you pull them back quickly. It is obvious that no one could sleep here tonight, not even wrapped in every blanket they owned. Your breath leaves your mouth in thick, cloudy bursts. You look up at the gaps between the wall logs. Each one is a doorway for cold wind. Each one is a reminder of how hurried the work was. A strange little memory surfaces while you examine the half-built cabin. A quirky tidbit recorded in a wanderer's journal. Some settlers believed that singing while building kept the cold at bay. They claimed that the vibrations from their voices warmed the chest and arms just enough to keep the hands working. You picture that scene now. A few voices rising shakily over the wind, wood chips flying, and exhausted men trying to convince themselves that a tune could hold off the cold. Maybe it helped. Maybe the rhythm kept them swinging their axes a little longer. You stand and walk to the open edge of the roof. Snow collects on your eyelashes. You blink and squint up at the structure. It is a fragile thing, more idea than shelter, and yet someone risked their winters on this small dream. You can almost feel the urgency in the notches cut into the logs. Each mark says hurry. Each splinter says please let this be enough. Historians still argue whether settlers underestimated how long it took to build a proper home, or whether the raw conditions simply overwhelmed even the most experienced woodsman. You consider the debate as you run a hand along the nearest log. The truth probably shifts somewhere between the two. Ambition collided with reality, and winter often decided the outcome. You step outside again and let the storm close around you. Snowflakes sting your cheeks. You tuck your chin into your coat and move toward the next structure in the clearing. The wind whistles through the trees behind you, shaking ice from the branches. You sense that each breath grows colder than the last. As you continue, your boots sink deep into soft drifts. The land rolls into small humps and hollows, each filled with swirling snow that settles like spilled flour. In the distance, another roof protrudes from the white haze. You follow the shape, determined to understand what the settlers faced on nights like this. When you reach the second cabin, you find it in slightly better shape. The walls rise to your shoulders. The roof is mostly covered, though gaps along the edges allow little streams of snow to slip inside. You push the door gently. It shifts but stays closed. You try again, pushing harder until it creaks open enough for you to squeeze through. Inside, the air is just a little calmer. You can hear the wind, but it no longer strikes your face directly. The floor is bare but smoother than the one before. A few planks lie near the corner, ready to be hammered into place. Someone measured these carefully. Someone planned for bedtime comfort that never fully materialized. Your shoulders drop slightly. Even a half-finished home like this would have felt like luxury in a storm. But as you look around, you sense the fear that must have lived in these walls during winter nights. The cold seeps in from every direction. The air is sharp. You can almost imagine a family sitting here, huddled close, whispering that the roof would hold, that the walls would not let the wind in, that morning would come. You move to the far wall and feel the cold radiating off it. Your fingers grow numb, even through your gloves. You let your hand fall. You take a slow breath and picture the settlers trying to sleep in this half-made room. No fireplace, no chimney, no real insulation. Only determination and whatever scraps of warmth they could gather. You linger there for a while, listening to the muffled roar of the storm outside. The wind scratches at the boards. Snow drifts through the smallest gaps, landing on the floor in tiny glowing specks. You sense that this was the reality for so many people who arrived on the frontier hoping for a fresh start. Winter cared nothing for dreams. It arrived early and stayed late. You let your breath slow until the sound of the storm fades at the edges of your awareness. The room grows softer around you, even though the cold remains. The unfinished walls feel like the beginning of a story, and you know that the journey into deeper winter has only just begun. You leave the half-finished cabin behind, stepping back into the open white breath of the storm. The wind curls around your neck like cold fingers, and you instinctively hunch your shoulders while trudging forward through the rising drifts. The snow flows almost waist-high now, soft in some places, and crusted like glass in others. Every step sinks, pulls, resists. You begin to understand why settlers wrote about blizzards as if they were living creatures, unpredictable and relentless. The path in front of you feels less like a trail and more like a negotiation with nature. Ahead, the outline of another cabin appears as a low, dark silhouette half buried in snow. You make your way toward it, hearing the crunch of ice under each step, hearing the wind hiss through the trees like distant steam. When you reach the door, you find it blocked. Not jammed, not frozen, but simply sealed behind a wall of snow that reaches nearly to the roof's edge. The drifts cling to the cabin like an extra layer of armor, heavy and unmoving. You run your glove along the packed surface. It is smooth and strangely warm compared to the wind. Your breath catches for a moment as you realize this accidental barricade would have terrified any family trapped inside. If the entrance disappeared entirely under a deep snowbank, someone might spend the entire night wondering whether they could dig out before air grew too thin or the roof caved under the weight. You clear a small portion of the drift with your hands, scooping until the wooden frame appears beneath the hard crust. When you push against the door, it groans open just enough for you to slip inside. The interior is dim, quieter than the storm outside, though the cabin shakes now and then when a heavy blast hits the roof. You step forward carefully. Snow has spilled across the floor in a pale ridge, and the boards beneath it creak loudly. A thin shaft of winter light pokes through a knothole in the wall, performing a trembling dance across the snowy patch. You imagine the family who might have lived here, startled awake by the sound of snow piling against the door, until the entire structure felt smothered. You ease the door closed again and take a deeper look around the room. A few clay pots sit overturned, as if someone knocked them aside in a rush. A straw-filled mattress rests in a corner, flattened by long use. A simple wooden stool lies on its side. Everything suggests that people moved through this space hurriedly, pushed by the weather. The cabin feels like a snapshot of fear captured in wood and shadow. You kneel by the window opening. The shutters are closed, but snow presses against them heavily, making the wooden slats bulge inward. You place your fingers against the panel. The wood vibrates faintly with the weight outside. You imagine lying in this room on a storm night, listening to the constant thump of snow piling higher and higher, wondering whether you will be trapped by morning. A detail from frontier accounts flickers through your thoughts. Many diaries from the era mention that doors sometimes froze shut entirely during blizzards, leaving families to climb through roof hatches or break small ventilation holes in panic. You picture the tense silence before someone decides to hammer at the wall with the blunt end of an axe. When you breathe in, you swear you can smell a faint impression of old pine smoke and fear lingering in the air. While studying the room, a small memory from a wandering naturalist slides into your mind. He once described snowdrifts as nature's accidental insulation, and settlers soon discovered the same thing. A mound of snow pressed tightly against a cabin wall reduced the wind's ability to snake through the cracks. It was not intentional, more like a winter surprise, but the effect was real. You run your hand along the edge of the drift near the door and feel that truth. It is cold, yes, but shielded from the wind's bite. You pause, letting your thoughts drift. A strange fragment from oral folklore surfaces. Some families whispered that winter spirits packed snow against the cabins of those who would survive the season. It was half superstition and half comfort, passed along in hushed tones while adults tried to calm frightened children. You imagine a mother leaning close to her sleepy daughter, telling her that the snow outside is a gentle guardian, not a threat. Then a quieter reflection settles over you. Specialists who study early settlement patterns remain divided on how common these snow-blocked nights really were. Some argue they happened only during extremely violent storms. Others suggest they were regular winter occurrences on the frontier, so ordinary that many families stopped writing about them after a while. You weigh both possibilities, standing in the semi-dark of the little room, listening to the storm press against the roof like a heavy blanket. You cross the cabin slowly, letting your fingers brush the rough logs as you move. The walls feel cold, but steadier than you expected. You can sense that settlers must have felt the same mix of dread and comfort. The snow drifting against the walls might trap them, but it also muffled the wind, softening the sound of the storm the way a thick quilt softens the edges of a long night. You press your palm flat against the wall, closing your eyes. There is a stillness here, fragile but real. The storm rages outside, but in this moment, the cabin feels suspended, like the center of a quiet bubble. You imagine a family huddling together on the straw mattress, breathing in unison, whispering soft prayers or telling stories to distract one another from the sound of snow creeping higher. You step toward the door again and give the wood a gentle push. The drift outside resists. You push harder. The door opens only a crack. You slip through sideways, brushing snow from your coat. The blast of wind hits your face and wakes every nerve. You pull the door shut behind you, letting the cabin return to its muffled silence. The world outside is brighter now, though still harsh. Snow reflects what little light slips through the cloud cover, giving the landscape a ghostly glow. The drifts roll across the clearing like frozen waves. You start walking again, each step sinking deep, each exhale turning into pale mist that rises and fades into the wind. As you move away from the buried cabin, you start to understand how terrifying and strangely protective snow could be for settlers. It could block the door, steal your escape route, and smother your only sense of safety. But it could also shield you from the cold wind that cut like a blade. Every winter night on the frontier must have been a negotiation with this force that acted both as enemy and ally. You pause on a small rise, listening to the storm's shifting voice. The wind moans against the hills in a low, drawn-out tone. Ice-laden branches tap together like wooden chimes. The sound feels ancient, older than any settlement, older than any wandering trail. You breathe in and let the cold settle inside your imagination. You can feel the story tightening around you, pulling you deeper into the heart of the frontier winter. You take another step, then another, heading toward the next structure barely visible through the haze. Your journey is far from finished. The storm is still growing, and the cabins ahead hold their own secrets about how people once fought for rest in the coldest hours of the year. You push forward through the swirling white world, the storm brushing against you like something half alive. Your legs burn with the weight of each step, and the snow keeps tugging at your boots, as if it hopes to pull you down for a long winter nap you definitely do not want to take. You peer through the blowing flakes until another small shape appears on your left. It is not truly a house. It is more like a cramped wooden box slumped in the middle of the clearing. When you move closer, you notice the door stands slightly ajar, trembling on its leather hinges. Inside, the air feels strangely still, though cold flows through the room like a slow-moving river. You scan the interior and find nearly nothing, just a flattened pile of straw in one corner, and a few scraps of cloth scattered on the packed dirt. There is no bed frame here, no real mattress, no blanket that looks capable of doing more than pretending to keep someone warm. You kneel on the straw and feel the harsh dryness of it through your gloves. It scratches your fingers. It pricks your palm. It feels like a place where sleep would be more an act of willpower than rest. You settle onto your knees and imagine stretching out on this thin layer of straw with the cold crawling up your back. You picture the early settlers lying here, wrapped in coats, scarves, and whatever fabric they had left after the long journey. You picture them curling tight, pressing knees to chest, trying to slow their breathing so they would not lose precious heat. Even inside a cabin, the cold felt like a guest who refused to leave. A detail from early settlement records rises in your thoughts. Many families slept directly on the floor their first winter because lumber was too scarce or time was too short to build raised beds. In some regions, people waited months before they could even think about constructing furniture. As you stare at the straw heap, you feel that reality settle in. This rough bedding was not temporary for some families. It was the only option they had through long nights when temperatures dipped far below comfortable. You lift a handful of straw and let it fall back onto the floor. It rustles with a quiet, fragile sound. The faint scent of old grass clings to your gloves, and you imagine what the room would have smelled like in the past. Earth, damp wood, cold air, and the faint sweetness of straw warmed slightly by human bodies. It is a thin kind of comfort, but it is still comfort. Your eyes drift to a small cloth bag near the wall. It is torn open, and a few feathers spill out. You pick one up and roll it between your fingers. It is stiff with cold. The discovery pulls a faint, odd memory from frontier stories. A wanderer once wrote about settlers stuffing beds with anything soft they could find, sometimes using feathers mixed with cattail fluff, dry moss, or even spare rope fibers. It created a mattress that barely cushioned the body, but added a whisper of insulation. You smile quietly at the thought of someone proudly declaring they had built a feather bed, even if it looked more like a lumpy sack. You lie back on the straw for a moment, letting the chilled smell of the room seep into your imagination. The roof creaks above you. A thin layer of frost clings to the rafters. Every time the wind hits the cabin, a light dusting of snow falls through the cracks and lands on your coat in tiny sparkling flecks. Your breath fogs in slow, rhythmic bursts, and you picture a family lying here together, trying to synchronize their breathing, so the space between them stays warm. As you study the room, you notice a narrow gap between two logs on the far wall. Through it, a tiny thread of icy wind slips across the straw. You press your hand against the draft and feel its sharp edge. Settlers must have used anything they could find to plug gaps like this. Cloth scraps, mud mixed with grass, even strips of bark. Every crack mattered when you slept on the floor because cold travelled along the ground like a relentless tide. A small recollection from frontier letters comes to mind. One writer described waking up with frost forming on the edge of a blanket, even though the family was inside their cabin. The moisture from their breath froze overnight, leaving sparkles of ice on their bedding. You run your fingers over the straw again, and imagine the stiff, cold cotton blankets used back then. Waking up surrounded by frost must have been a strange mix of beauty and dread. Your attention drifts to a broken wooden crate near the wall. It is empty, though a few nails jut out like crooked teeth. Someone must have intended to build a bed platform from crates like this, but never finished. Materials were so scarce frontier families sometimes dismantled wagons to construct their first pieces of furniture. You picture them choosing between a comfortable place to sleep and the ability to travel again in the spring. A quiet thought surfaces while you sit in the cabin. Researchers familiar with early pioneer living conditions have pointed out that families often rotated sleeping spots during the winter. They shifted their bedding away from drafts, moved children to warmer corners, or rearranged straw piles nightly based on where the cold seeped through the wall. Not all scholars agree on how consistent this practice was. Some believe it was common everywhere. Others argue it happened mostly in regions where temperatures dropped to dangerous extremes. As you sit in the little room, you sense how both ideas might hold truth depending on the winter. You rise from the straw and walk to the wall. The wood is rough beneath your gloves, split by cold, darkened by sap that once flowed through it. You press your palm against it and picture a family doing the same, wondering whether the wall could endure another night of pounding wind. You imagine parents listening anxiously for any sign the structure might fail. The squeak of a log shifting, the moan of snow sliding off the roof, the deep pop that sometimes came from wood flexing under cold. Every sound could be reassuring or frightening depending on how tired everyone was. You wander to the opposite wall where bundles of dried grass line the baseboard. Settlers used such bundles to fill gaps under sleeping areas, hoping to stop cold from rising into their bones. You crouch and touch one of the bundles. It crumbles slightly, leaving a powdery trace on your glove. Even this flimsy material must have felt precious during a storm. It was one more barrier between your skin and the frozen ground. You draw a slow breath and look at the straw bed one last time. You imagine trying to fall asleep here while the storm shook the world outside. You picture pulling your coat collar up and tucking your chin deep to trap every bit of warmth. You picture listening to the breathing of others around you, each inhale and exhale creating a tiny cloud above their faces. Survival depended less on comfort and more on staying close, staying still, and staying wrapped in whatever layers one could muster. When you finally stand, the cabin seems smaller than before. The walls lean inward slightly, creating a feeling of fragile safety. You push the door open and let the wind rush in. The snow pushes against your legs immediately, reminding you that your journey continues. You glance back at the straw pile. For a moment, you imagine lying there again, but this time you feel yourself drifting off, not from exhaustion, but from the soft rhythm of your own breath. You pull the door closed behind you and face the storm once more. Snow swirls around your boots, and the cold curls up at your ankles like a determined cat. You begin walking toward the next cabin shape, emerging through the haze. Each structure reveals another piece of how settlers attempted to sleep through nights that wanted to swallow them whole. You push onward through the storm, your breath curling into small clouds that vanish almost instantly in the bitter air. The snow feels heavier now, as if the sky has grown tired of holding it. Each flake lands with a soft tap on your coat, clinging to the fabric before melting just enough to leave a faint chill against your skin. As you trudge forward, another dark shape emerges through the drifting white. This one is larger than the previous cabin, though the roof sags under the weight of accumulated snow. A thin trickle of smoke escapes from a hole near the top, faint and wavering, as if even the smoke is unsure it wants to face this storm. When you reach the door, you hear something unusual inside, a soft snort, followed by a low rhythmic rumble. You pull the door open a few inches, and are immediately greeted by a wave of warm, earthy air. You slip inside and blink as your eyes adjust. This is not just a home, it is a shared haven for people and animals alike. The room is divided by a rough wooden partition that barely reaches your chest. On one side lie bundles of straw, blankets, and a few crates arranged into sleeping spots for the family. On the other side, pressed closely together, stand a cow, 2 goats, and a thick-coated ox whose breath fogs the air in slow, steady bursts. The warmth hits you with surprising strength. You inhale and catch the scent of animals, damp hay, and faint traces of sweat rising from the bodies huddled together. The earthy fragrance wraps around you, not unpleasant, just deeply alive. You can imagine frontier families stepping into this shared warmth with immense relief, grateful for any heat source that did not rely on scarce firewood or a fragile hearth. You move closer to the partition and rest your hand on the top rail. The ox shifts slightly, its massive body radiating heat like a living furnace. Its hide is speckled with frost around the neck, though the rest of its body steams gently in the sheltered space. You stand there for a moment, feeling the warmth seep into your gloves. You sense why families might have chosen this arrangement. It was practical, immediate, and surprisingly effective. A recollection from early rural farm records rises in your mind. Many settlers relied on the heat of livestock during winter nights, especially when storms grew too vicious to keep a fire going. Buildings known as longhouses in some regions housed people and animals under the same roof, a practice that preserved warmth and reduced the amount of fuel needed to survive deep cold. Standing here now, you feel the truth of that simple strategy. The warmth is real, even if the space remains bitter at the edges. You step deeper into the room, the floorboards soft with compacted straw. On the family's side of the partition, a small child-sized mattress lies close to the dividing wall. You kneel beside it, imagining a young girl or boy curling close enough to feel the warmth of the animals on the other side. You touch the blanket. It is rough wool, scratchy enough to irritate your cheek, but thick and sturdy. The faint smell of lanolin still clings to the fibers, even after years of use. While exploring the room, a small but charming observation flits through your mind. Some frontier families believed that sleeping near animals ensured good dreams. They claimed that the rhythmic breathing of a cow or the gentle shifting of a horse created a soothing atmosphere, almost like the earliest form of white noise. You smile quietly at the idea. Even now, the sound of the animals moving slowly, sighing softly, feels strangely comforting in this icy world. You walk toward a narrow window where frost grows in intricate patterns across the wooden frame. You press your finger against it and watch the frost melt into tiny droplets. The window pane rattles as the wind strikes the outside wall. You imagine lying here at night, hearing the storm rage while warm breath from the livestock puffed gently into the dark. The contrast must have been surreal. Outside, a world trying to freeze you solid. Inside, a room pulsing with living heat. As you stand there, a thought crosses your mind that researchers sometimes mention in frontier studies. Opinions differ on whether this shared living method was a last resort or a widely accepted norm. Some argue that it was a desperate measure taken only in the harshest regions. Others point out that mixing people and livestock inside shelters might have been more common than folks today assume, especially in places where winters locked the landscape for months. You let the idea settle, appreciating how survival shaped decisions more than any tidy blueprint for daily life. You turn back toward the animals. The cow watches you, her dark eyes reflecting the dim glow of the lantern hanging near a support beam. She flicks her ear, sending a faint sprinkle of moisture into the air. You lift your hand and offer your palm. She leans forward slightly, warm breath brushing your glove. You feel an unexpected moment of connection. In the harshest winters, creatures like this were not just livestock. They were quiet partners in survival. You wander toward the sleeping side of the room again. A small stack of blankets sits near a corner, neatly folded. You pick one up and shake it gently. Tiny dust motes rise and drift in the lantern light. The blanket smells of wool and earth, touched with the slightest hint of smoke. You imagine someone wrapping the blanket around their shoulders and settling in for the night, listening to the muffled storm while the animals shifted softly in the dark. The storm pounds the walls again, and snow sifts through a small crack in the roof. You move beneath the gap and look up. The boards above are warped, patched in several places with bark and bundled rushes. It is not perfect protection, but it is enough. Snow filters down like scattered glitter, dusting your coat before melting. You brush it off and take one more deep breath of the warm air around you. You move toward the exit, watching your boots leave prints across the straw-covered floor. Before stepping outside, you take a last glance at the family's sleeping area. Even now, with the storm clawing at the walls, the room feels anchored by the gentle presence of the animals. The air hums softly with warmth and quiet life. The cold is waiting outside, but for one suspended moment, you understand how deeply comforting this arrangement must have been in the depths of winter. You pull the door open. A gust of wind bursts in, stealing the warmth from your face. You step into the open storm again, letting the door close behind you. Snow swirls around your boots instantly, but the memory of that shared warmth lingers like a soft glow in your chest. You continue forward, knowing the next shelter will reveal another layer of frontier winter survival. You push away from the animal-warmed shelter, stepping back into a world that feels colder for having known comfort. The wind slips under your collar and brushes the back of your neck with icy insistence. For a moment, you pause and draw your coat tighter, wishing you could borrow even a bit of that gentle barn heat. But the frontier does not care about wishes, so you keep walking, following a faint depression in the snow that might once have been a path. Ahead, another cabin waits, its shape softened by the thick layers of white resting on the roof. As you approach, the door stands closed, a thin rim of ice sealing its edges. You tug at it, once, twice, until a brittle crack breaks the frost and the door swings open just enough to let you slip inside. The interior is dim. A few broken chairs lean against the wall, their legs warped by cold. In one corner, you find a pile of clothing, stiff with frost but arranged deliberately, as if the family who lived here once prepared these garments each night as their version of armor. Heavy coats made of coarse wool, worn shirts layered 3 or 4 at a time, scarves thick enough to stand upright when frozen. You crouch down and lift one of the coats. It is heavy, much heavier than modern winter wear, and rough enough to scratch your wrist through your glove. You shake the garment gently, A few flakes of frost drift to the floor. Even in the stillness of the room, you can imagine someone pulling this coat tightly around their body as the night settled in, trying to trap whatever warmth remained after a long day of work in the cold. A practical detail from old settlement accounts drifts into your thoughts. Many families slept wearing every piece of clothing they owned, not because they wished to, but because frostbite lurked even inside the cabin. Children went to sleep with mittens on. Adults wrapped scarves around their heads and tucked spare shirts into every gap. You picture yourself doing the same, layering until movement feels clumsy, but warmth is finally trapped beneath wool and linen. You set the coat aside and examine the makeshift sleeping area beside it. Instead of mattresses, several layers of garments are stacked into a crude cushion. You touch the surface. It feels uneven, lumpy, but soft enough to offer some relief from the frozen floor. This pile of clothes might have served as a bed for a parent, or maybe even an entire family huddled together. You sit on the edge of the garment mound, letting its unevenness settle beneath you. The cold sneaks in through the boards underfoot, but the layered fabrics create a small buffer, enough for you to imagine drifting into sleep if exhaustion pressed hard enough. As you sit there, you can almost feel the weight of winter on your eyelids, the kind of fatigue that makes every sound softer and every breath slower. A small, unusual observation rises from frontier folklore. Some settlers claimed that wearing multiple layers during sleep created a strange kind of dreaminess, as if the weight of so much fabric pressed them into deeper, slower rest. It might sound odd now, but you imagine the gentle heaviness of layered wool, the sense of being wrapped and held in a world that offered little safety. Perhaps those dreams were a brief escape from winter's constant pressure. You glance toward the wall where a row of clothing pegs jut from the logs. Several garments still hang there, frozen into stiff shapes that resemble hollow silhouettes. You reach out and touch one of the sleeves. The fabric crackles faintly. You imagine a settler rushing to remove it from the peg on a frigid morning, pulling it on with fingers so numb they could barely grip the buttons. You let your hand fall. The room grows quieter as you settle into the corner. The soft hiss of the wind outside flows through a crack, brushing your cheek with a needle-sharp draft. You pull one of the blankets from the garment pile and drape it over your shoulders. It smells faintly of old wool, earth, and a trace of smoke. The weight feels grounding, almost comforting. A dim memory from historical textile studies flickers into focus. Clothing on the frontier was often repaired dozens of times, patched and reworked until the original fabric barely remained. Some families wore garments for years, layering them until the seams strained just to keep the cold at bay. Looking around the little room, you sense that every piece of fabric here has lived through countless winters. You hold the blanket tighter and breathe slow, imagining the settlers preparing for bed each night. They would slip on their warmest coats, then layer on scarves, shawls, mittens, and whatever garments were not needed by other family members. Sleeping was not a chance to relax. It was a structured, deliberate effort to maintain body heat until dawn. As you rest against the wall, another thought surfaces, something mentioned occasionally in academic discussions of frontier life. Specialists have different views on exactly how effective layering was during deep winter nights. Some argue that too many layers reduced circulation and made sleep more restless. Others insist that people survived precisely because they wore their warmest clothes even under blankets. Here, in the dim hush of the cabin, you feel both sides of the argument. The warmth slowly gathering under your blanket is real, but the slight tension at the back of your neck says the layers are also restrictive. You take a slow breath and imagine adjusting your clothing the way a settler might. Loosen the scarf, tighten the coat, pull the sleeves down to protect your wrists, smooth the blanket over your legs. Each small movement changes the way the cold presses against you. You begin to understand how intimately early families knew their clothing, how every stitch connected to survival. Your attention drifts toward a small wooden crate under the window. You open the lid carefully. Inside, folded with care, lie several extra shirts. The fabric is coarse, hand-spun, with uneven threads running through it like tiny waves. You lift one shirt and hold it to the lantern light. The weave is loose, but tight enough to trap warmth when layered. You imagine a mother tucking this shirt over her child's shoulders before bed, humming softly to distract them from the storm rattling the roof. You place the shirt back and press your palm lightly against the crate. The wood is cold. A faint vibration from the wind passes through it. You close your eyes and listen. The storm outside growls against the wall, but inside this cabin, the clothing shields you with a thin but earnest barrier. You rise from the garment pile, letting the blanket fall back into place. The air nips at your skin again, sharp and insistent. You walk toward the door. Your boots strike the boards with soft thuds, and the room seems to sway slightly under the influence of the storm. You give the cabin one final glance. The clothes, the blankets, and the crude bedding all whisper a quiet truth about survival in a world without fireplaces. Heat was not guaranteed. Warmth was something you earned layer by layer, stitch by stitch, night after night. You lift the latch and push the door open. A burst of wind sweeps in, cold enough to sting your eyes. You step outside, pulling your collar tight. The snow swirls around you again, hungry and alive. You move forward, climbing into the next drift, knowing that the frontier still has more lessons to share about how people once slept through nights that felt colder than fear itself. You lean into the storm again, the cold needling your cheeks as you push forward through the deep drifts that drag at your legs. The world feels muffled now, as if the snow itself has closed around your ears. You catch glimpses of dark shapes beneath the white landscape, shadows that might be rocks or bushes, or the remains of an abandoned wagon. Your breath hangs in front of you in long, slow clouds. Every exhale seems to mark the passing of time in this frozen wilderness. A new structure takes shape ahead of you. This cabin is smaller than the others, its roof bowed inward from years of heavy snows. The door is shut tight, pressed into its frame as though the wind itself has been trying to pull it open and finally gave up. You push against it gently. Nothing moves. You lean your weight forward and try again. A thin crack of sound splits the silence as the frost seal weakens. The door groans open an inch at a time, until you slip inside and pull it closed behind you. The room is nearly pitch dark. Only the faintest traces of grey light filter through a tiny hole in the roof. You stand still for a moment, listening. At first you hear nothing but the storm outside, a distant roar softened by thick wooden walls. Then you hear it, a slow, almost delicate rasping sound. You move closer to the centre of the room and finally see them. A few small embers glowing in a shallow clay bowl, set into a depression in the dirt. They barely give off light, but you feel a thin thread of warmth slip across your gloved fingertips as you reach toward them. These are not flames. They are not even the dying remains of a fire. They are simply coals, faintly breathing their last little glow into the cold. You lower yourself onto your knees and hold your palms above them. The warmth is subtle, almost shy, but it reaches you. In a night like this, it would have mattered more than you can imagine. You examine the clay bowl. Its edges are chipped, and the bottom is thick with soot. A few charred splinters of wood lie nearby, as if someone had broken sticks by hand to keep the embers alive. You imagine a family hovering over this little pool of heat, cupping their hands and whispering to each other in the dim light. They would have tended the embers carefully, knowing that if the last glow faded, they might not find enough dry wood in the morning to relight the fire. A memory from frontier field notes slips into your thoughts. Many settlers relied on ember preservation rather than full fires during bad storms. Wood was precious, and flames could draw smoke into unventilated rooms. So families kept small bowls of coals alive through the night, feeding them tiny scraps when needed, and shielding them with pottery shards or flat stones. It was an art of patience, an overnight vigil. You lean closer to the embers. Their glow pulses gently, flickering brighter when the wind rattles the cabin walls. You reach for a small twig lying beside the bowl and place it carefully on top. The glowing core expands, a thin ribbon of warmth rising from it in a slow curl. You watch it and feel your chest loosen with a quiet sense of reassurance. Even the smallest ember can mean survival when the cold has teeth. As you study the room, something catches your attention. A small wooden box sits against the wall, half filled with dry moss and bark curls. These look like the makings of fire starter. You lift a handful and feel how light it is, how easily it might catch a spark. It makes sense. Families would have needed a backup plan if the embers died. Still, you sense the anxiety that must have hovered over every winter night. Waking to a cold hearth with no flame left was a frontier nightmare. A little fragment from a traveller's account floats into your mind. One wanderer described the way some settlers whispered to the embers, as if coaxing a shy animal to stay alive. They blew on them gently, shielded them with cupped hands, and treated them almost like companions. It sounds whimsical now, but kneeling here in the half-dark, the idea feels strangely believable. When heat is scarce, you treat anything that gives it with quiet reverence. You shift your weight and sit back against a rough wooden beam. The cold seeps through the floor and touches your spine. Even with the embers glowing nearby, the room feels fragile, suspended between warmth and freezing. You imagine lying down on the straw mattress a few steps away, knowing that the coals might not last till dawn. You picture a father waking every hour to check the bowl, making sure the red glow is still alive. A thought surfaces from academic discussions about frontier techniques. Some researchers have noted that ember preservation required skill and attentiveness, while others question how consistently families managed the task during long winters. The accounts vary. Some settlers wrote proudly about keeping a single coal alive for days. Others admitted their embers often died overnight, forcing them to resort to flint and steel in the morning. You consider both sides as you continue to watch the slow pulse of the coals. You reach out and touch the dirt beside the bowl. It is warm in a tiny circle around the clay, warmth that fades quickly into cold as your hand moves away. You trace that warmth with your fingertips, imagining a child crawling close during the night, drawn to it like a moth to a dim flame. You imagine parents pulling the child back gently, warning that the embers could scorch their hands. The balance between heat and danger must have felt constant. Your gaze shifts upward to the low ceiling. Soot stains trace faint arcs across the beams. The patterns suggest small fires or embers burned here often, but never strong enough to send flames licking toward the roof. The settlers knew their boundaries. They needed warmth, but they also feared a house fire that could turn a precious cabin into ash within minutes. You breathe in slowly, letting the scent of cold wood and faint smoke fill your lungs. The smell is old, almost ancient, as if the room has held its breath through 100 winters. You close your eyes briefly and picture the earliest families gathered here, wrapped in clothing, huddled near the embers, whispering stories to distract one another from the storm's endless lament outside. When you open your eyes again, the embers still glow, small but determined. You give the twig one last gentle push into the center of the bowl. The flame brightens a shade, enough to cast faint shadows that dance across the logs. You rise slowly, stretching your back as the cold slips under your coat once more. You walk toward the door. When you pull it open, the wind surges inside, threatening to extinguish the tiny embers behind you. You close the door quickly, not wanting your brief visit to undo the fragile warmth someone once fought so hard to keep alive. Outside, the storm greets you like an old adversary, swirling flakes around your boots and tugging at your sleeves. You breathe out, letting the cold nip at your lips, and begin your slow path toward the next shelter. The night still stretches wide ahead of you, and there are more stories hidden in the snowdrifts. You step back into the storm, pulling the door tight behind you as if to protect the tiny ember glow you just left. The wind circles you in a wild spiral, tugging at your coat, slipping icy fingers down your sleeves. You take a slow breath and push forward, feeling each flake sting your skin with renewed sharpness. The cold burrows deeper now, determined to remind you that comfort is always temporary out here. As you walk, the landscape shifts into a rolling sheet of white. The horizon disappears. Your boots sink with each step, and you hear the soft crunch of snow compacting under your weight. Then you see it. Another cabin, barely visible through the drifting haze. You move toward it, one step at a time, until the lines of the building sharpen into focus. The door is slightly open, swaying inward and outward in the storm's unsteady rhythm. You slip inside quickly and shut the door, letting the room settle into a muted quiet. This cabin feels narrower than the others. Fewer objects, fewer signs of daily work. What catches your attention immediately are the shapes on the floor. 3 people, shaped bundles tucked close together beneath a mound of quilts and patched blankets. You walk closer and feel the faint warmth still lingering in the air, as if the bodies that once slept here left their heat behind. The sleeping area looks cramped, each shape pressed close enough that their shoulders would have touched. You imagine how settlers arranged themselves in such tight quarters. Survival had little patience for personal space. Even if strangers visited during a storm, even if neighbors stopped by seeking shelter, everyone pushed together when the night arrived. Warmth was life, and life required closeness. You kneel beside the quilts and run your fingers over the stitched edges. The fabric is rough but thick. You lift a corner and feel the heavy weight of layered cloth beneath. This is not fine bedding. It is a patchwork of whatever a family could find. Scraps of old clothing, burlap washed clean, wool pieces cut from coats too torn to repair. Everything stitched into a single breathing blanket that grew heavier each year as new layers were added. You picture these settlers lying shoulder to shoulder, listening to each other's breaths merge in a slow rhythm. You imagine the surprise warmth of a stranger's elbow pressing against yours, the quiet whisper of someone shifting position, the soft sound of a child's sigh drifting across the small room. A detail from early community diaries surfaces in your memory. Many frontier families practiced what was sometimes called shared body sleeping, especially during fierce storms. They gathered themselves into tight clusters, wrapping quilts over the whole group like a cocoon. The goal was simple: trap body heat before the cold stole it. Standing here, you can practically feel the warmth trapped beneath these layers, an echo of someone's lifeline against the freezing dark. You lift another quilt edge and notice a small gap between the blankets. A flash of memory from old traveler accounts flickers in your thoughts. Some visitors described how awkward it felt to sleep beside total strangers during winter stops. Yet, after a few minutes wrapped in shared warmth, the awkwardness faded and exhaustion took over. The cold had a way of erasing social distance faster than any introduction. You ease your hand under the blanket and touch the straw mattress beneath. It is warm in some patches and cold in others, as if the bed still remembers where bodies once pressed into it. The straw rustles under your palm, releasing a faint scent of dried grass and old earth. You breathe in that quiet fragrance and imagine drifting to sleep here, wrapped in layers of warmth that rely on human closeness as much as cloth. As you sit there, a small recollection from oral winter lore slips forward. Some families told children that sleeping together was not only warm, but also lucky. They said that each person kept a piece of winter away simply by being present. Whether superstition or comfort, the idea must have softened the fear trembling in young hearts on nights when storms shook the walls. You shift your weight and rest your back against a log beam. The room is dim, lit only by the faint glow coming from a narrow gap in the shutters. You hear the muted roar of the storm outside, constant and unrelenting. Inside, though, the air feels thicker, warmer, shaped by the memory of bodies pressed close together. For a moment, you let your eyes close and imagine what it would feel like to settle in beside the others, guarded by the shared heat of a small community. In the murmuring quiet, another thought drifts through your mind, one sometimes mentioned in studies of early rural families. Specialists do not completely agree on how common these shared sleeping arrangements were between unrelated settlers. Some think it was mostly reserved for emergencies, while others believe it was a regular winter strategy in remote regions. Evidence points in both directions, and you can see why the discussions continue. Standing in this little room, it feels like a choice shaped less by custom and more by survival. You open your eyes and rise slowly, letting the quilts fall back into place. The silence in the cabin thickens around you. A delicate, cold breath creeps down from the roof, brushing your shoulders. You gently smooth the blankets with your gloves, feeling the slight give beneath them. Even without anyone lying there now, the space feels crowded with stories. You walk toward the door and rest your hand on the wooden frame. The cabin creaks softly as the wind presses against it, making the walls shift with tired familiarity. You take one last glance at the heap of shared bedding. The image stays with you, a cluster of sleeping bodies wrapped in one heavy quilt, forming a single island of warmth in a sea of cold. You pull the door open and step into the storm again, letting the cold settle on your cheeks. The snow swirls as if greeting you with renewed urgency. You take a deep breath of the sharp night air and begin to walk. Another cabin waits in the distance, its silhouette faint but steady, inviting you deeper into the frontier winter. You lower your head against the wind and push through another drift, your boots sinking deep enough that each step feels like lifting a weight tied to your ankles. Snowflakes cling to your eyelashes, blurring the world into a soft curtain of white. For a moment you stop and listen. The storm hums around you in long, wavering tones. Then, far ahead, you notice a cabin half hidden behind a swell of snow, its roof sloping downward under the burden of ice. You approach slowly, brushing frost from your face. The door stands cracked open, rocked gently by the wind. You slip inside and pull it closed, letting the storm dull into a distant whisper. The interior greets you with unexpected coziness. Not warm, not safe, but close. The room is filled with quilts piled high, almost forming a mound in the center. Some are faded into soft pastels, others stitched with rough patches of fabric. You step closer, and the scent of old wool and dried herbs drifts upward. These are not ordinary blankets. They are burrow blankets, constructed layer upon layer, thick enough to swallow a person whole. You kneel at the edge of the mound and press your hand into it. The fabrics sink slightly, then spring back. The settlers who lived here must have understood the art of burrowing deeply into bedding, letting the heat of the human body create a tiny pocket of warmth beneath the layers. You lift a corner of one quilt. Beneath it lies another, heavier still, patched from scraps of deer hide, worn cotton, and what appears to be pieces of burlap softened with age. Under that, a third quilt waits, filled with frayed fibers that puff through small tears. You imagine a family diving beneath these layers each night, tucking knees to chest, letting the darkness and weight of the bedding wrap around them like a protective cocoon. A scene from early household journals comes to mind. Many families in severe winter regions created deep sleeping burrows, blankets piled so high that only a nose peeked out for air. Children often vanished completely under the quilts, their soft breaths forming tiny warm hollows in the coldest rooms. You picture that now, a tiny shape disappearing under blankets, leaving only a faint rustle of straw and wool. You sit on the floor beside the blankets and slip your hand beneath the top layer. The warmth is faint, left over from the insulation itself rather than any recent occupant. Still, the small pocket of trapped heat feels almost luxurious after the icy storm outside. You close your eyes and imagine crawling under these quilts, letting the layers settle over you like soft snow. The weight would calm your breath. The darkness would erase the edges of the storm. As you rest there, a small, unusual detail from a settler's memoir surfaces. Some families placed warm herbs or crushed pine needles between quilt layers, believing the fragrance soothed the mind and eased winter anxiety. You lean closer to the blankets, and yes, you detect a whisper of dried lavender or maybe sage embedded deep within the fabric. The scent is faint but grounding. You pull one of the quilts closer to examine the stitching. The patterns are uneven, clearly made by hands that learn technique through necessity rather than formal skill. Every seam tells a quiet story. Here is a patch cut from a child's old shirt. There is a strip of fabric that once belonged to a winter coat. Survival often left fingerprints on everyday objects, and these blankets hold those marks with pride. You shift to the far edge of the bedding and notice how the quilts taper downward toward the floor. Straw is piled thick beneath them, forming a soft slope that encourages sleepers to burrow even deeper. You run your hand through the straw and hear the gentle, papery sound it makes. The straw is dry, well packed, and faintly sweet-smelling. A bed like this works by trapping heat beneath layers. Once you burrow in, the warmth stays near your skin, gathering slowly until sleep becomes unavoidable. A thought rises from studies on frontier domestic life. Researchers often mention that winter bedding arrangements varied widely, but the burrow method was particularly common in regions plagued by long storms. There is some disagreement, however, about how widespread the technique truly was. Some experts believe most settlers relied on piles of blankets because fireplaces were unreliable during fierce winds. Others argue it was more typical in areas where snow blocked chimneys entirely. You consider both positions as you stroke the quilt's heavy edge. In conditions like these, you suspect any method that offered warmth would have spread quickly. You draw one quilt around your shoulders and let its heft settle on you. The weight presses gently, almost reassuringly, and the earthy scent of wool fills your nose. A quiet memory surfaces from frontier children's recollections. Some kids joked that getting out from under the blankets in the morning felt like climbing out of a warm cave into the jaws of a frozen world. You smile softly at the thought. Even now, wrapped in the quilt, the idea feels true. You lie back across a corner of the bedding, letting the quilt drape over your legs. The sound of the storm becomes softer here, muted by the thick walls and heavy blankets. Snow taps lightly on the roof in an irregular rhythm, like someone knocking gently with chilled knuckles. You breathe in and out, letting the slow pattern of your breath mingle with the quiet around you. You imagine settlers burrowing together, shifting to find the warmest spot, whispering late-night stories or humming soft lullabies to calm frightened children. In the darkness of winter nights, these small rituals mattered. They turned harsh cabins into temporary sanctuaries, even when the wind tried its best to rattle every nerve. You sit up again and gently fold the quilt back into its place. Your fingers linger on the fabric, appreciating the effort that went into its creation. Every patch tells a story. Every stitch marks a choice. People did not make these blankets because they enjoyed sewing in the cold. They made them because winter demanded it. You walk to the door, glance back at the blanket mound one more time, and feel a quiet warmth spread inside your chest. The room may be cold, but the bedding still holds echoes of comfort earned through endurance. When you open the door, the storm greets you with its familiar sharp breath. Snow swirls at your feet, and the wind nips your ears. You pull your coat tight, step forward into the shifting white, and continue toward the next shape rising in the distance, ready for another glimpse into winter's long night. You push onward once more, boots sinking deep into drifts that swallow sound and soften the edges of the world. The storm lifts for a brief moment, just enough for the sky to glow a pale silver. You take that as an invitation and keep moving. The next cabin comes into view slowly, its roof low, its walls sturdy, and a faint wisp of something curling near the doorway. Not smoke, not breath, just a hint of warmth escaping from a gap in the logs. When you step inside, the air is cold but not painfully so. Instead, the room holds a strange, almost hopeful heat lingering near the center. You walk forward and stop when your boot bumps into something round and heavy. A smooth, river-worn stone sits wrapped in thick fabric, still giving off a gentle warmth. You crouch, lean closer, and touch it. The warmth surprises you. It has the soft, steady feel of heat that seeps rather than burns. You lift the stone into your gloved hands. The shape is almost perfect, smoothed by years in a rushing river. Settlers would gather stones like these, place them directly in the fire until they glowed faint red, then wrap them in cloth or hide to act as portable heaters. You can almost see the process. Fire crackling, someone leaning close, turning the stones with a stick. Children watching with wide eyes as the stones transformed from cold grey to shimmering orange, ready to be tucked under blankets during frigid nights. You hold the warming stone near your chest, appreciating how slowly its heat spreads. It is not hot enough to burn, but warm enough to offer comfort in a room where the air still bites at your nose. You set the stone back on the floor carefully, understanding why these were treasured during winter months. They held heat long after the fire died down, giving families a fighting chance against icy nights. A practical detail from early homestead records drifts into your thoughts. Many frontier households favored river stones because they heated evenly and did not crack easily. Stones taken from fields often shattered when exposed to sudden heat, sometimes sending shards flying. River stones, shaped by water over decades, were safer and lasted longer. Settlers knew this well. You imagine someone walking along a frozen riverbank, selecting the smoothest stones they could find, planning ahead for nights when flames could not be relied upon. You move farther into the cabin, noticing several more stones wrapped in fabric and tucked under a pile of blankets. The cloth is worn, patched repeatedly, and carries the faint smell of fire. You lift another stone, still warm. Not as warm as the first, but warm enough to notice. These stones must have been heated earlier in the evening and carried around the cabin to warm beds, hands, and even feet so cold they could barely wiggle. A quiet, unusual memory from a traveller's notebook surfaces. He wrote that some families used heated stones in unexpected ways, placing them at the foot of the bed not only for warmth but to dry damp socks or mittens during the night. It sounds small, almost trivial, but drying wet clothes could prevent frostbite or illness. You picture socks hung over a heated stone, steam rising faintly in the dark room while the wind growled outside. You stand again and walk toward a corner where a pile of firewood sits. The pieces are small, more kindling than logs. It seems this family knew the storm could snatch their fire at any moment. Heating stones might have been their most reliable source of warmth. You touch the nearest log. It feels dry enough, though the top layer is coated with frost. You can imagine someone brushing snow from the logs each night, trying to ensure they would catch flame quickly. You glance up at the ceiling. The beams are darkened by soot, arranged neatly overhead. A narrow vent in the roof lets smoke escape, though it is partly sealed by ice. You can imagine how heating stones might have been safer on a blizzard night. Fires could fill a room with smoke if vents iced over. Hot stones, though, needed no constant airflow. A moment of reflection rises from historical environmental studies. Scholars disagree on how heavily frontier families depended on heated stones during severe winters. Some argue that stones were merely supplementary, used when fires burned low. Others suggest they were essential during storm seasons when wind gusts made open flames unreliable or dangerous indoors. Standing in this dim cabin, you sense the appeal of both sides. The stones radiate steady warmth, but they cannot replace a true fire. They simply hold the heat longer when flames cannot be trusted. You walk to the far wall, where a long, low bed frame rests. Several blankets lie rumpled across it. You pull one back and see stones nestled along the underside, like tiny sun-warmed anchors. When settlers lay down here, the warmth from the stones would creep into the straw, slowly rising toward their chilled bodies. You run your hand over the straw and feel the faint warmth still lingering there. You sit on the edge of the bed frame and tuck your hands around one of the stones beneath the blanket. The heat hums against your palms. You imagine how it must have felt to climb into bed on a night like this. Press your feet toward the warm stones, pull thick blankets over your body, and finally let exhaustion tug you toward sleep. A faint sound interrupts the stillness, soft tapping against the window shutters, snow drifting sideways again. You glance at the walls, listening to the storm retake its place around the cabin. Inside, though, the heat from the stones forms a small oasis. You breathe in the grounded scent of warm cloth and faint charcoal, letting the quiet settle. Beside the bed frame, a small woven basket holds extra cloth wrappings. You lift one. Its surface is singed in places, evidence of many nights spent cradling hot stones. The cloth feels rough but sturdy, threaded with thick yarn meant to withstand high heat. You imagine the careful hands that wrapped each stone, checking the temperature by hovering fingers just above the surface. adjusting the cloth so no one burned themselves in the dark. You place the wrapping back and rise slowly. The warmth clings to your hands for a moment before fading back into the cold. You walk toward the door, pausing to take one last look at the stones glowing faintly on the floor. They seem to breathe gently, each one holding onto the last fragments of earned warmth. You open the door. A gust of icy wind rushes in, slipping under your collar and stinging your cheeks. You step into the storm once again, pulling your coat tight as snow swirls around you. The cold bites harder now that your hands remember the warmth of the stones, but you keep moving. Ahead lies another shelter, another lesson in surviving nights with no fireplace, and the storm has many stories left to tell. You brace yourself against the wind again, letting the cold settle into every seam of your coat as you continue toward the next dim shape on the horizon. Snow curls around your boots in restless spirals, as if the storm itself is trying to herd you away from the shelters that dot this frozen landscape. Your breath comes out in long, white ribbons. You rub your hands together inside your gloves, remembering the warm stones from the last cabin and wishing you could carry one of them now. You approach the next structure and notice a thin trail of steam drifting from a gap beneath the door. Not smoke, not breath, something gentler. You push the door open, and a soft wave of warmth, barely there but undeniably present, meets your face. Inside, a long wooden table sits near the center of the room, and arranged on top are several clay cups, some still half filled with liquid that has cooled to a pale brown. A kettle rests nearby, blackened from use. The air carries a faint smell of herbs steeped in hot water. You walk forward and lift one of the cups. The liquid inside is no longer hot, but when you touch the rim, you feel that it was warmed recently. You sip it. The taste is faint and slightly bitter, but comforting in its own way. You set the cup down and notice a small basket beside the kettle. Inside lie dried leaves, a few twigs, and even some thin slices of bark. These were not luxury teas. They were survival brews. You imagine the settlers gathering whatever plants remained green or usable during the winter. Pine needles steeped in hot water for a burst of sharp flavor. Dried berries simmered until they gave off a hint of sweetness. Even tree bark boiled into a thin drink that tasted more of determination than enjoyment. In a world without steady heat, warm drinks served as internal fireplaces, offering comfort one swallow at a time. A detail from early winter journals rises in your memory. Many families brewed hot water drinks even when they had nothing meaningful to add, simply because the warmth spread through the body and offered a little relief. Some called it warming water. Others just called it hope in a cup. You look at the kettle and imagine a mother ladling warm liquid into cups while the storm shook the walls, handing them out carefully to children wrapped in patchwork blankets. You run your fingers along the rim of the kettle. The metal is cold now, but you can picture it moments earlier, steaming gently in the dim room. Settlers often boiled water in shifts, letting the heat push through the cabin air, if only a little. Each cup fueled the body from within, offering warmth that lasted longer than firelight alone. As you circle the table, another small, unusual recollection rises from a traveller's notes. Some families added crushed wild mint or dried birch twigs to their drinks, believing the scent calmed the nerves during loud storms. The taste was mild, sometimes unpleasant, but the aroma offered a moment of peace when the world outside sounded harsh enough to shake the soul. You lift one of the cups again and take another small sip, imagining that same calming ritual. The storm outside thuds heavily against the walls, making the window frame tremble. You glance toward the shutter and notice a faint line of frost creeping across it like a delicate painting. The cold is still present, still pushing, still insisting on entering. But inside this cabin, the lingering warmth of hot drinks softens the air just enough that you can breathe more easily. You walk toward the corner, where a small clay pot rests over a few gathered embers. The pot must have held boiling water earlier. Its sides are streaked with mineral lines, and its handle is wrapped in cloth to protect bare hands. You touch the cloth. It is still warm, faintly so, a quiet reminder of recent human presence. You sit on a low stool beside the embers, stretching your hands toward them. A thin heat radiates upward, enough to make your palms tingle. You picture a family gathered in this room earlier tonight. A father leaning close to the embers, coaxing them to stay alive. A mother pouring warm drinks for the group. Children hunched over their cups, letting the steam rise over their faces like a little shield against the cold. A thought from discussions among researchers drifts quietly into focus. Some specialists believe that hot drinks were more psychologically grounding than physically warming, offering frontier families a sense of ritual that helped them push through long winter nights. Others argue that the warmth genuinely helped conserve body heat by raising internal temperature. The debate meanders through academic circles, but here in the dim cabin, the question feels unnecessary. A warm drink in a frozen world is comfort by any measure. You lift the kettle, feeling its weight pull slightly against your arm. Even empty, it carries significance. You tip it gently, imagining the soft glug of hot water pouring into a waiting cup. You imagine cupping that vessel between both hands, feeling the heat travel slowly up your wrists, circling your ribs, warming your breath. You set the kettle down and rise to your feet. The storm outside grows louder, signaling another wave of wind rolling across the land. You walk toward the bedding corner, where several mugs stand beside folded quilts. Someone must have drunk warm tea or pine brew before crawling beneath those blankets. You touch the nearest quilt. Its fabric is cool now, but the faint fragrance of herbs clings to it, as if steam once rolled across the fabric and settled there. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine curling under these blankets after sipping a warm brew, feeling the heat move through your body just enough to lull you towards sleep. Even if the warmth did not last long, it would be enough to calm the mind, soften the edges of fear, and ease the trembling that winter storms often stirred. When you open your eyes again, you take in the room one last time. The cups, the kettle, the herbs, the lingering scent of steam. These small comforts were the settler's version of modern hot chocolate or tea on a winter night, but with far greater stakes. A few degrees of warmth could make the difference between waking up in the morning or not. You move toward the door, gripping the handle with your gloved hand. As you open it, a sharp burst of wind slashes across your face, making your eyes water instantly. You step outside, pulling the door closed behind you as the storm resumes its hungry chorus. Ahead, more cabins wait in the dim distance. You adjust your collar, tuck your chin, and keep moving, carrying with you the memory of warm cups and soft steam lingering in the cold. You push back into the open night, your face stinging as the wind sweeps around you like a living thing determined to test your resolve. The storm has not calmed at all. If anything, it feels as though it has grown impatient, flinging sharp flakes into your cheeks as you trudge forward. You keep one arm tucked close to your chest, protecting the faint memory of warmth from the last cabin, even though that heat has already faded from your skin. As you walk, you notice a silhouette rising ahead, low and wide, built from thick logs stacked with more care than some of the earlier shelters. The roof dips under the weight of snow but does not sag dangerously. When you reach the door, you find it hooked shut from the outside, not locked but secured loosely, probably to keep it from flapping in the wind. You lift the latch and step inside. The first thing that hits you is the scent, earthy, musky, wild, the smell of animal hides stored for warmth. In the dim interior, you see them draped across wooden pegs and hung along the walls. Deer hides, softened through long hours of scraping and stretching. Fox pelts stitched together in patchwork form. Thick bearskins folded in half with their edges barely brushing the floor. You step closer, running your gloved hand along a deer hide. The surface is surprisingly soft, pliant, still carrying a faint trace of the forest it came from. You walk further in and find a pile of layered hides arranged into a sleeping nest. The layers rise in uneven rounds, with the softest furs placed inside, and the tougher hides forming the outer shell. You kneel and touch the edge. It is warm, even now without bodies lying in it. The hides have trapped heat more effectively than wool alone. You imagine slipping under them, feeling the heavy weight settle onto your chest, sealing you inside with your own breath. A recollection emerges from old trapping community letters. Many winter households depended heavily on animal hides, not just for clothing, but as essential sleeping coverings. Deer and elk hides were valued for their warmth, while fox and wolf pelts added softness. Bears, though scarce and dangerous to hunt, provided immense insulation. Lying here, you sense why settlers prized these materials so fiercely. You pick up a fox pelt. Its fur is thick, glossy, and patterned with white at the tips, as if frosted permanently by winter. As you stroke it, a slightly odd historical note rises in your memory. Some families insisted that fox hides carried what they called night warmth, claiming the fur seemed to retain heat longer than other pelts. Was it true or simply superstition mixed with comfort? Hard to say. Still, the hide in your hands feels warm enough that you understand how such beliefs could form in frozen cabins. You drape the fox pelt around your shoulders for a moment and feel the warmth seep down your back. The weight is grounding. You imagine the settlers wearing layers of fur over their clothes before crawling into bed. The combined insulation must have felt like stepping into a warm cave carved from the heart of winter. You set the pelt aside and examine the bear hide lying near the wall. It is dark, thick, and so heavy that lifting it requires both hands. You haul part of it upward and feel the weight pull your arms downward. Sleeping under this must have felt like being pinned by warmth itself. The hide is wide enough that a whole family could share it, tucking its edges around their shoulders to seal out the drafts. As you gently lower the hide, a small memory from frontier children's anecdotes slips forward. Some kids claimed they could fall asleep faster when wrapped in pelts because the fur muffled sound, softening the crackling of the wind outside. It was like being nested in silence, cushioned from the storm's sharp voice. You sit on the floor and let your fingers trail across the overlapping hides. The textures vary wildly. Some feel velvety, some coarse, but all of them promise warmth that blankets alone could not offer. You can almost hear a parent telling a child to burrow beneath 2 deer hides before the storm grew worse. You can imagine a teenager reluctantly sharing a bear skin with a younger sibling, both of them trying to stretch their toes toward the warmest part. As you explore, your gaze travels to the drying line above. Several hide strips hang there, stiff in the cold. They might have been used to patch worn spots in older furs or to wrap around feet as makeshift socks. Frontier families had little room for waste. Every part of an animal that offered warmth became part of their winter armor. You examine a large elk hide draped over a beam. The underside is soft and suede-like. You press your palm flat and feel the faint warmth it still holds. A thought rises from studies on early subsistence living. Researchers have long discussed whether hide bedding was more widespread in northern settlements or evenly used throughout frontier regions. Some argue that families in forested areas relied on furs extensively. Others believe hide bedding was universal wherever winters pressed hard. You consider both views while touching the hides. In this cabin, it is obvious that furs were not just helpful but essential. You pick up a smaller pelt and pull it around your shoulders again. The smell is strong at first, earthy and slightly smoky from the tanning process. But after a moment, the scent becomes comforting, like a quiet reminder that survival often comes from nature's gifts. You imagine lying here at night, wrapped in furs, listening to the soft swish of hides each time someone shifted. You lay the small pelt back and approach the sleeping nest made from layered hides. You ease into it slowly, letting the fur settle under your weight. The warmth is immediate. Even without anyone lying here now, the hides cradle your body gently, sealing in the heat from your breath. You tug a larger hide across your legs, feeling the softness brush against your skin through your clothing. It is easy to imagine drifting into sleep like this, layers of quiet warmth pressing down until the outside world feels far away. You take another slow breath, appreciating the silence inside the room. The storm outside continues, but the thick hides hanging on the walls absorb much of the sound. Their natural insulation creates a cocoon of calm. You close your eyes for a moment and let that calm sink deeper. When you sit up again, you smooth the hides back into place. You stand and walk toward the door. Before leaving, you look around the room one last time. Furs draped like protective spirits, thick layers piled high into nests of warmth, the scent of the forest lingering in every corner. You push the door open and step into the storm. The wind strikes instantly, but you feel steadier from the memory of the warmth behind you. The cold nips at your cheeks, and snow swirls around your boots. You tighten your coat and begin walking again. The next cabin waits farther ahead, a faint shape in the drifting haze, promising another glimpse into the way early settlers met the winter night. You walk back into the storm, letting the cold rush around your ears in a swirling chorus that rises and falls with the wind. Snowflakes whirl past you in frantic spirals, brushing your cheeks with needles of frost. Your boots crunch through a layer of freshly fallen snow, each step sinking deeper than you expect. Ahead, the next cabin stands half obscured, its logs darkened by moisture, its seams shining with thin ribbons of ice. You make your way toward it, leaning into the storm until your fingers finally grip the latch. When you step inside, the first thing you feel is the draft. It rushes across your feet like a stream of icy water, slipping through gaps in the walls and the spaces between floorboards. This cabin is colder than the others, colder even than the open air, because wind snakes straight through the structure as if claiming it for itself. You pull the door closed behind you and look around. The room is wide but unfinished. The logs used for the walls were stacked in haste, leaving uneven cracks between them. Some gaps are thin as a thread, others wide enough for you to slip a finger through. Through one of the larger spaces, you can see snowflakes drifting sideways. You shiver, imagining how settlers felt when they discovered their walls were not even close to airtight. You crouch near one of the cracks and place your hand beside it. The wind slips through with surprising force, chilling your knuckles instantly. You look along the wall and see small dried clumps of something stuck between several logs. You scratch at one and realize it is mud mixed with bits of straw or grass. You stand and move toward a bucket by the corner, still holding a smear of dried clay inside. This was the settlers' attempt at windproofing. When storms rose without warning, families rushed to collect clay from riverbanks or frost-softened soil. They mixed it with chopped grass or dry moss and pressed the thick paste into every visible gap. It was called daubing, but in a winter crisis it was less a technique and more an act of desperation. You kneel beside the wall again and pick at one of the dried patches. It crumbles between your fingers. The settlers who lived here must have performed this job hundreds of times. Each winter storm would crack the dried mud, and each night they would scramble to repair it before sleeping. The process never ended. A practical detail from early building accounts floats into your thoughts. Many frontier families relied on clay ceiling because proper chinking materials were scarce, and the cold arrived long before ideal construction methods could be completed. The clay paste worked well enough when temperatures held steady, but violent weather made it brittle. You can see that truth in every cracked patch along the cabin wall. You reach for a narrow stick lying nearby. A bit of dried mud still clings to its tip. This might have been used to push the clay deeper into the cracks. You turn it in your hand and visualize someone rushing through this room, pressing mud into the walls while a storm raged outside. A faint, slightly strange memory from a traveler's journal drifts to the front of your mind. He wrote that some families believed adding ash to the clay strengthened it and kept evil winter spirits from slipping through the cracks. You smile softly at the thought. Whether those beliefs held any weight or not, you understand how deeply people wished for even a hint of protection during brutal nights. You walk toward the far wall where a large crack runs from the floor to halfway up the logs. The wind pushes snow into the room through that gap, leaving a small pile drifting along the floor. You kneel and scoop it away. The cold sticks to your glove, melting slightly, chilling your fingertips even through the thick fabric. Beside the crack stands a bowl filled with mud that has frozen solid. You tap its surface, and the clay echoes like stone. If this storm had arrived before the family could complete the ceiling, they would have been forced to work with mud barely soft enough to shape. You imagine their cold hands, knuckles stiff, trying desperately to smear frozen clay along the walls before nightfall. You stand and scan the room again. The furniture is sparse and pushed away from the outer walls. That was common. Settlers often moved their sleeping spots toward the center of the cabin during winter storms because the walls became too cold to lean against. You imagine someone dragging their straw mattress a few inches closer to the fire pit each night, adjusting its position based on where the wind found new cracks. A reflection from historical studies surfaces. Researchers have long discussed whether clay ceiling truly made a significant difference in cabin warmth or whether it was more symbolic than effective. Some say it kept wind out well enough to prevent frostbite. Others argue the ceiling only slowed drafts rather than stopping them entirely. As you stand here feeling the cold swirling through the cracks, you can understand both views. You turn your attention to the small fire pit in the center of the room. It is not lit. Only cold ash and blackened stones remain. Without proper windproofing, any flame here would flicker wildly, smoke twisting unpredictably through the cabin. You brush ash aside with your glove and trace the circle of stones. Their soot darkens your fingertips. You walk back to the wall and press your ear against the logs. The storm outside growls like distant thunder. The cold radiates through the wood, brushing your cheek as if reminding you that winter is always searching for a way inside. You pull away slowly and exhale. You walk toward a shelf along the back wall. On it sit several handfuls of dried grass and moss, collected in anticipation of more daubing. You pick up a handful. It crinkles softly, smelling faintly of earth and old rain. You picture someone kneeling on the floor, mixing this with clay as the storm roared outside. Their hands would move quickly, pressing the mixture into cracks, smoothing it with a flat stone or bare palm. You set the grass back and shake the numbness from your fingers. The storm rattles the shutters again, sending a thin line of snow drifting downward. You hold your breath for a moment and imagine lying here at night. No fireplace, no embers, only the fragile clay holding back the winter. You step to the center of the room and look around. Everything in this cabin echoes the settlers' determination. Clay smeared by cold hands, moss stuffed into cracks, grass woven into tiny ropes to bind loose logs. This place is held together not just by wood, but by endurance. You breathe deeply and let your shoulders soften as you imagine the family settling in for sleep. They would huddle in the center of the cabin, wrapped in layers, listening to the wind probe the walls for weaknesses. Someone might rise in the middle of the night to press more clay into a new draft. They might whisper reassurance to a scared child, promising the wall would hold until morning. You move toward the door. The latch is cold against your glove. You pull it open and step back into the swirling storm. Snow immediately clings to your boots, and the wind grabs at your coat like an impatient hand. You take one last look at the drafty cabin behind you. It feels like a testament to the settlers' resourcefulness. They patched and repaired until the walls could last another night, and another after that, surviving winter with little more than earth, grass, and relentless perseverance. You turn toward the next faint shape in the distance and begin walking, eager to discover the next story the cold world holds. You walk deeper into the storm, letting the wind wrap around you in long, icy ribbons that snap against your coat. The night blurs into white swirls, flakes drifting sideways, sometimes upward, sometimes in tight circles that make the world feel tilted. Your boots grow heavier with each step as snow packs against the soles. Then you notice something unusual in the distance. The next shelter sits low to the ground, almost sunken into the landscape, its roof barely visible beneath a thick blanket of snow. You move closer and realize this is not a typical cabin. The walls are curved inward, shaped more like a mound than a house. A small opening carved into the drift leads downward. You crouch, brush aside loose snow, and find a narrow tunnel reinforced with branches. You lower yourself inside, feeling the cold briefly sharpen against your back before the tunnel curves slightly and opens into a strange hollow. You step into the space and straighten your spine. The air inside this snow cave is still and surprisingly calm. It is cold, yes, but not the knife-edge cold of the storm above. This feels muted, softened. The sound of the wind is distant now, muffled so deeply that it becomes nothing more than a long hum pressed against the outer walls. You lift your hand and touch the snow wall beside you. It is smooth, packed tightly, and cold enough to sting, yet the surface does not drip or crumble. Snow, when shaped correctly, becomes an excellent insulator, trapping pockets of air inside its structure. Settlers sometimes learned this from observing indigenous winter shelters, noticing how snow caves stayed warmer than half-finished cabins in a storm. You walk farther into the hollow. The ceiling rises a little, just high enough for you to stand fully. A low bench of snow lines one side of the wall. On top of it sits a thick layer of straw covered by a hide, forming a simple sleeping shelf. You run your fingers along the hide. It is stiff from cold but not brittle. You imagine lying here, pressed between the insulating wall and the warm weight of layered furs. A memory from frontier correspondence flickers. Some travellers wrote about spending nights in makeshift snow shelters after losing their way on winter roads. They described the shock of discovering how much warmer the interior felt compared to the open night. Snow, when packed right, sealed out the wind like a surprisingly loyal shield. You kneel beside the sleeping shelf and place your palm against the hide again. Beneath it, the packed snow bench feels firm and cold, but the hide softens the sting. Families who took refuge in snow caves likely spread blankets or extra clothing here, transforming a frozen ledge into something approaching comfort. You imagine a group of exhausted settlers crawling inside after losing daylight, desperate for any place that kept the wind at bay. As you explore, an unusual detail from oral winter lore comes to mind. Some people insisted that snow caves carried a gentle heartbeat sound at night, created by distant gusts brushing across the outer walls. Children were told that if they listened closely, they could hear winter breathing. You rest your ear against the wall and, for a moment, you almost believe it. The wind outside presses against the cave in rhythmic pulses, turning the storm into something strangely calming. You step toward a small alcove carved into the far wall. Inside sits a lantern, its glass cracked and frosted. You lift it gently. The lantern is empty, but soot still coats its chimney. Someone used it recently, perhaps to create a soft glow that would reflect across the snow and brighten the hollow. You imagine the dim, amber light bouncing off the white walls, warming the eyes even if it did little for the body. A question lingering in historical discussions drifts through your thoughts. Some winter survival accounts claim snow caves were common emergency shelters, while others suggest settlers rarely used them unless absolutely forced. Evidence is scattered. Diaries describe both desperation and ingenuity. You consider this as you breathe the cool, steady air of the cave. It feels like a place shaped by necessity, not preference. You lower the lantern and step deeper into the hollow, noticing how your own breath floats upward in soft spirals before fading into the ceiling. The sound of your footsteps is muffled, giving each movement a floating quality. You sit on the snow shelf and let the silence surround you. It is peaceful in an eerie, suspended way. No creaking logs, no rattling shutters, no draft clawing at your ankles. Only the faint hum of distant wind and the soft crunch when you shift your weight. You pull your coat closer and imagine the settlers arranging their bedding here. Perhaps they laid 2 hides over the straw, then huddled close, their breaths warming the small cavity. Heat rises slowly in a space like this, trapped by the snow walls. Enough warmth might collect near the ceiling to form faint frost crystals that drip softly as they melt. You look up and see tiny specks glistening in the dim light, frozen droplets from earlier warmth. You pick up the hide and smell it. The scent of smoke lingers faintly, mixed with the musky forest smell of the animal it once belonged to. You imagine someone dragging this hide into the cave, brushing snow off it, and spreading it carefully. You imagine cold fingers stiffening as they worked quickly to prepare a sleeping place before darkness claimed the last bit of energy. A small recollection from a trapper's journal surfaces. He once wrote that sleeping in a snow cave felt like curling up inside a cloud, cold but quiet, soft around the edges. A place where storms could scream but not reach you. You rest your hand against the wall and understand the sentiment. The outside world feels far away here, almost unreal. You rise and move toward the tunnel entrance. The slope upward glows faintly with filtered light from above. You crouch and crawl through the narrow passage. Cold air rushes in as you near the exit. When you emerge, the wind grips you instantly, reminding you that the cave's peace was temporary. You stand, brushing snow from your coat, feeling the storm wrap around you with renewed force. Behind you, the cave sits quietly beneath its snowdrift, hidden, protective, waiting for the next weary traveller. You take a breath that cuts sharply at your lungs and begin walking toward the next faint shape ahead, ready to learn another way the settlers slept through the unforgiving winter. You pull yourself out of the snow cave and back into the swirling world of white, letting the cold tighten around your shoulders like a thick rope. The wind pushes at you from the side now, guiding your steps in uneven tilts. You lean forward and continue walking, breath rising in slow, foggy wisps. As you navigate the deepening drifts, you begin to see a faint cluster of shadows ahead. Not trees, not rocks, something more structured. You narrow your eyes and realize it is a small group of cabins gathered close together, almost touching corners. You approach the nearest one and push the door open. Inside, the room is dim but warmer than you expect. Several pallets line the floor, each covered in blankets and clothing, and none of them belong to only one family. You step farther in and notice footprints in the snow-covered floorboards. Many pairs of boots have crossed this threshold recently. This cabin is a community shelter, a place where neighbors gathered when storms grew too wild for anyone to sleep alone. You look around and imagine the scene just a few hours ago. People from nearby homesteads hurrying through the blizzard, clutching blankets and small bundles of food. Children carried on hips, faces wrapped tightly in scarves. Adults knocking on the door, not with hesitation but with relief. Frontier winters erased boundaries quickly. Rivalries softened, grudges faded. The cold made companions out of everyone. You kneel near the largest sleeping pallet. It is wide enough for at least 5 people. You press your hand against the blankets. The lingering warmth is unmistakable. Someone slept here not long ago, wrapped shoulder to shoulder with others. You imagine adults lying at the edges while children slept safely in the middle, bodies arranged like spokes around a shared source of heat. A practical detail from community settlement accounts slips into your thoughts. During severe winters, families often sheltered together because body heat multiplied more effectively in groups than in isolated cabins. Entire neighborhoods sometimes slept in shifts, trading places on the warmest pallet. Standing here in the soft dimness, you feel the truth of that strategy. The air still holds their shared warmth and the faint murmur of many conversations layered atop one another. You walk toward the corner and notice a small wooden table with remnants of a communal meal, bits of dried bread, a half-empty clay pitcher, and a bowl smeared with traces of stew. The room smells faintly of cooked meat, herbs, and smoke. You picture a circle of settlers gathered around the table, passing the bowl carefully to make sure everyone had at least a small taste before lying down together. A small, unusual detail flickers in your memory. Some settlements used a simple call across the valley when storms became too dangerous. A whistle, a knock pattern, or even a lantern hung outside the door signaled neighbors to gather. You imagine hearing that call faintly through the storm, guiding families toward shared shelter like a fragile beacon. You walk across the room and examine a stack of quilts folded near the wall. They are mismatched, clearly brought from different homes. Some made of thick wool, others of scrap cloth pieced together lovingly, some lined with worn fur. Every quilt carries warmth from a different household, now layered into one communal heap. You pick up a quilt and shake it gently. Straw dust drifts off in a pale cloud, catching the soft light. You drape the quilt over your shoulders. Its warmth settles onto your back like a small embrace. You imagine lying beneath this same quilt with several others, their breaths rising and falling beside you, the combined heat making sleep feel possible in the bitter cold. You walk toward the far pallet, noticing footsteps circling around it. A few stones wrapped in cloth sit nearby, probably warmed earlier by a fire and passed between people during the night. You pick one up. It is cold now, but the cloth still holds the faint memory of heat, as if someone clutched it tightly for comfort. A reflection from settlement community studies drifts into your mind. Some researchers believe these group shelters formed naturally out of necessity, while others think communities planned them in advance as winter strategies. Historical evidence is scattered. Some journals describe spontaneous gatherings during storms. Others mention shared houses designated for emergencies. Here, in the dim light of the cabin, you sense the truth lies somewhere in between. Winter demanded cooperation, and people answered. You step toward the window. Frost covers the shutter in delicate patterns. You trace one with a gloved finger, imagining children doing the same while adults whispered in low voices nearby. Perhaps someone told a story to calm the room. Perhaps someone hummed a lullaby that carried softly across the sleeping forms. You walk back toward the center of the cabin and lower yourself onto a wide pallet. The blankets whisper under your weight. You lie down for a moment, letting your eyes drift closed. The quiet inside the room grows deeper. The storm outside becomes a distant roar, softened by thick walls and the memory of shared warmth. You can almost hear echoes of laughter, murmurs of conversation, and the slow breathing of many bodies resting together. It feels safe in a fragile, temporary way. You sit up again and let the blankets fall from your shoulders. As you stand, the cabin sighs under a new gust of wind. Snow shifts against the outer wall with a faint hiss. You walk to the door, rest your hand on the latch, and pause. You picture the settlers waking in the morning, stretching cramped limbs, sharing the last scraps of food, and preparing to walk back through the snow to their own cabins. For one night, they survive together. You open the door. The storm greets you instantly, swirling around your boots and tugging at your coat. You glance back once more at the cozy, crowded room. Then you step into the icy world again and walk toward the next shadowed shape in the distance, ready to witness another fragment of winter survival. You step out of the community shelter and back into the storm, letting the cold sweep across your cheeks as if reclaiming any warmth you gathered inside. Snow pushes against your boots with renewed force, making each step feel like wading through thick, icy water. You take a steady breath and press onward. The next cabin stands smaller than the rest, with a crooked roof and a thin chimney that looks more decorative than functional. When you reach the door, it hangs slightly ajar. You slip inside and let the wind hush behind you. Immediately you notice the atmosphere here feels different. The room is scattered with small piles of fabric scraps, bits of straw, and half-finished knots. Several shapes line the floor, odd little nests crafted from whatever the settlers could find. These are children's sleeping corners, improvised by tiny hands and curious minds during the long winter evenings. You kneel beside the nearest nest. It is a small dome made of straw, old scarves, and a faded quilt torn almost completely in half. Inside, the space forms a pocket just large enough for a child to curl into. You run your hand through the straw. It rustles softly, releasing a faint scent of dried grass mixed with something sweet, maybe from crushed berries used as dye. You picture children laughing quietly as they gathered scraps from around the cabin to create these sleeping hideouts. While adults worried about drafts and storms, kids saw opportunity. They shaped their own comfort, weaving imagination into the harshness of winter. A detail preserved in several early settlement recollections rises in your thoughts. Many children invented small winter nests or dens inside the cabin, believing it helped them stay warmer at night. Some families encouraged it, Others considered it play that doubled as practical insulation. You trace the edges of the little nest and imagine a child burrowing into it, drawing blankets tight, pretending to be a fox in a winter burrow. You shift to another nest near the wall. This one is built from a line of wooden crates tipped on their sides, creating a tunnel-like shape. A layer of straw lines the bottom, topped with bits of old clothing stitched together haphazardly. You crawl halfway inside, your shoulders brushing the sides. It feels warmer here, not because the temperature changes, but because the closeness traps air around your body. You can imagine why children gravitated to these hidden spaces. They gave a sense of protection that wide-open bedding could not. As you sit in the nest, a faintly odd memory from frontier anecdotes surfaces. Some children claimed that arranging their nests in certain shapes brought good dreams, triangles for bravery, circles for comfort, narrow tunnels for adventurous sleep. Folklore blended with play, turning the cabin into a landscape of tiny shelters shaped by small hands. You smile as you lean back, imagining a parent shaking their head fondly but allowing the child's creation to remain untouched. You stand and examine the far corner of the room. Here, a larger nest sits against the wall. It looks more deliberate. Perhaps older siblings or even adults helped construct this one. Branches form a small frame, covered with hides and thick cloth. You lift a flap and peek inside. The space is surprisingly warm. The hide overhead traps heat, while the walls of the nest block drafts more effectively than open beds. You imagine multiple children crawling into this shared space, giggling quietly before sleep stole their voices. A quiet question from historical studies enters your thoughts. Some researchers suggest these improvised sleeping spots were widespread during harsh winters, while others think only families facing extreme conditions relied on them. Diaries reveal both. Some mothers wrote proudly about children building burrows, while other accounts mention no such thing. You look around the room and understand why opinions differ. These nests were born from creativity, not necessity alone, and families varied widely in how they approached bedtime warmth. You walk toward a small stack of cloth scraps on the table. Someone cut pieces from worn shirts, torn dresses, and frayed socks. You rub the fabric between your fingers. It is thin but soft. Children likely used these scraps to patch their nests or add layers inside their burrows. You imagine their tiny hands working carefully, determined to improve their shelters just like the adults patched cracks in the cabin walls. You move to the window, where frost clings in thick patterns, curling outward like delicate white leaves. You wipe a small section clear with your glove. Outside, the storm still hurls snow across the land, erasing shapes as quickly as they appear. Inside, the nests feel like private worlds where children escaped the fear of the wind and created something they could control. You walk back toward the center of the room and lower yourself onto one of the larger nests. The walls hug your sides gently. You close your eyes and listen. The storm outside becomes a soft rumble here, muted by cloth and straw. You imagine the quiet breathing of children drifting to sleep, the warmth of their bodies filling the tiny space, their laughter replaced by soft murmurs as dreams began. Another small memory surfaces from the writings of a traveling school teacher. She noted that winter brought out remarkable ingenuity in frontier children. With few toys and long nights, they turned survival tasks into games, building nests, arranging blankets into caves, and using warm stones as pretend lanterns helped them feel brave. You rest your hand on the hide above you and picture those little rituals filling the room with comfort. You sit up and take a final look around. The cabin feels scattered but alive. Scraps of cloth, straw trails on the floor, tiny structures that tell stories of warmth shaped by imagination. Despite the bitter cold outside, these nests carry a strange sense of joy, as if children met winter with resilience wrapped in play. You rise, brush straw from your coat, and walk toward the door. As you open it, the wind rushes inside immediately, snatching loose strands of straw into the air. You step out and pull the door close behind you. The storm embraces you again, all swirling white and sharp breath. You tuck your chin into your collar and continue through the drifts. Ahead, another shelter waits in the distance, offering its own tale of survival in the frozen night. You push onward through the storm again, your boots sinking so deeply that each step feels like lifting your legs out of wet cement. Your breath hangs in front of you in soft clouds, then disappears into the wind as if swallowed whole. The cold has settled into your bones now, a steady hum beneath your skin. Still, you keep walking. Far ahead, a small, narrow cabin leans slightly to one side, its roof thick with ice, its door coated in a smooth layer of frost. You reach the entrance and press your palm against the frozen wood. The frost cracks beneath your hand like thin glass. You push the door open and slide inside. The interior is dark. Only a thin sliver of grey daylight squeezes through a warped gap in the wall. As your eyes adjust, you see a long pallet in the centre of the room, covered with blankets stiffened from cold. A faint glitter coats the bedding. You walk closer and realize what you are seeing. Ice. A thin